Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go down memory lane real quick before we get to the actual topic of this video. I remember back in the early to mid 1980s, I remember that my dad used to work for Volkswagen, you know, the car company Volkswagen, and it was in New York State. And I believe that the county where it was located was Orange County, but I could be wrong. Anyways, the point is that back in the mid 80s, when my father was working for Volkswagen, that used to be like one of those jobs that people were like, oh, you work for Volkswagen? That's great, because it was a really good paying job. For the most part, my dad's income, in addition to a couple of like part-time jobs that he used to work 2-3 jobs all the time, but that Volkswagen job was the main job. That was the money maker. He used to do some tailoring on the side for a little extra money and stuff like that, right? But it was his main job, the Volkswagen job. And just to let you know, that Volkswagen, it wasn't a dealership per se. It was like a warehouse. It was like the central location in the United States. Now I believe it's located in New Jersey, but back then it was in New York. It was like the central warehouse in the US, to where any dealership around the country, if they needed a part, they would send their part request to that location. It would get picked, and then it would get shipped to wherever it was that it was needed. And that's what my dad did. He was like a picker. He would get a list, a shopping list. He would go shopping for those parts, put them in a box, and then someone else would be in charge of shipping them out, etc. Right? But I digress. Well, my dad, I think I remember hearing once that he made like 17-18 bucks an hour. Okay, that's not bad money today, really, if you're single, not if you have a family with 5 children. But with that main job as being his main bread making job, he was making about 34 grand a year. So I'm guessing that with his little side jobs that he had here and there, he was probably making around $45,000 a year. And he was able to raise a family of 5 children, and of course, my mother as well, with that salary. Well, if you go back to 1983, and someone did, and that's what we're going to talk about, what would it take today in order to replace a salary in 1983 that was equivalent to $30,000? And the reason that this is important, ladies and gentlemen, is so that you can prepare better for the times that are coming, and so that, more importantly, that you teach your children so they don't fall in the same trap that we've fallen in for the last several generations. Now, what was the thought process that made me want to make this video? It was a couple of comments that I read off of last Saturday's video. If I remember correctly, last Saturday I had a sponsor for precious metals, and I probably talked about gold and silver for a little bit. Now, this video I made sure not to have sponsored on purpose. That way you will not think that I'm only doing this video because I want to include a sponsor for precious metals. But I did not want to do that this time around, because I want you to understand that what I'm telling you, I believe 100% about precious metals. Well, anyway, this person here asked, my question is, why is gold so precious? Why? Well, I believe there's a couple of reasons why, not just the one that you can find in the books, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But here, this other person here pretty much gets it. They say, why did FDR take the U.S. off the gold standard in 1933? Because it constrains government expansion, etc. They get it, just that part. If you only understand one part as to why it is that governments don't want to have a gold standard, that's why, ladies and gentlemen, because it constrains what they can spend your money on. Therefore, it is you, or we the people, that have the power when the government is constrained as to what it can spend. However, when it doesn't have any constraints on what it can spend, like now, it can deficit spend all it wants without our permission. They continue to say, Nixon completely abandoned the remnants of the gold standard in 1971, which is correct. FDR took us off the gold standard pretty much, right? Because he took gold out of the system and replaced it with fiat currency. But that fiat currency was still backed by a bit of gold. I believe it was 40% gold backing to that fiat currency until 1971, when Nixon completely took us off and allowed the Federal Reserve and the government to open that spigot and start flooding the economy with fiat currency, i.e. Federal Reserve notes, i.e. dollars, that has caused the inflation that you are seeing now and have seen in the past. Since 1971, the dollar that we see today has been devalued by about 90+%, ladies and gentlemen. Do you think that was a coincidence? No, it happened because we were taken off the gold standard and governments no longer, or our government no longer, had to abide by the constraints put forth by gold. That ended the conversion of dollar to gold. Think about it and look where we are now. Sandy Labrador 8 or Labradoro 812 gets it 100%. And I want to say thank you both very much for leaving a comment. That does help the channel, believe it or not. But not only that, it helps other people within the comments understand further what it is that we're talking about. So a conversation is always a good thing to have. So let me go ahead and cover this before I forget, because you all know that I'm senile. What makes gold a precious metal? Okay, one of the things, and this is what you're going to find in the books, and they're going to say, why is gold a precious metal? Is because it's obviously a finite resource, right? So, and there's not as much of it in the world as other metals. So gold is a precious metal because all of the gold, if you took all of the gold that's ever been mined in the history of our mankind and compile it into one space, it's like between 3 or 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And that may sound like a lot on a personal basis, but go ahead and divide that up by about 8 billion people. It's not that much gold. That makes it pretty precious because it is scarce throughout the crust of the earth. Maybe there's trillions of pounds of it on some comet or something, but I've always said that if we ever get to the point where we have to go to a comet to mine gold or silver, imagine what the price of it nominally would be here already on Earth. Okay, another thing, in my opinion, and more importantly speaking, is that gold is a precious metal because it does what? It protects your purchasing power. It takes that $30,000 that you were spending back in 1983 and it holds that value all the way forward to 2024. To me, that makes it even more precious. Why? Because in my opinion, that is what gold was intended to do for humanity, to be a store of value so that it can keep governments from stealing your wealth from under you, just like they do now with inflation. And we'll just get to the nitty-gritty of this. That way you can come back if you like and revisit this article because it is very well worth reading, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot of good stuff here. I challenge you to do this. Go ahead and read this article with your children, whether they are young or old, whether they live at home or have moved out. Read this with your children and challenge them to dissect it and try to disprove what it says. And you may be giving them a gift that you don't even know that you're giving them if you do that. If your parents made $30K in 1983, today you'd have to make $162,000. Well, back in 2023, but let's just say today. Just to have the same purchasing power adjusted for inflation, says the economist that went through this exercise. Now, that is a difference of roughly almost 6-fold, about 5.5-fold, $132,000 a year more than you made 40 years ago just to have the same purchasing power. Why, AP? Why does this happen, ladies and gentlemen? Because of inflation. Inflation is not the price of things going up. The price of things going up is a symptom of inflation. Just like, for example, when you get a cold, you get a fever. A fever is not the cold. A fever is not why you're sick. A fever is a symptom of the cold that you got. So in this case, you can treat inflation as the cold, as the problem, and you can treat the price of things going up as the headache, as the symptom of the problem. I hope you understand that. Because if you take a look at the money supply since 1971, once they took us off the gold standard, how much it has risen, it has gone astronomical, ladies and gentlemen. And along with it has followed the price of assets and your purchasing power going down. Inflation erodes the buying power of each and every dollar. So you have to understand that money is worth less, and eventually it will be worthless. One word. Right now, the more they print, the less that money is worth. But eventually, just like all fiat currencies, the money will be worth less, which is one word, meaning worth nothing. Because of inflation, money is not worth as much as it was before. As the value of money has decreased, $30,000 is now worth much less than it was even a year ago, not to mention 1983. In Venezuela, they use the coffee to determine what inflation is. So I don't remember the actual numbers, but it's astronomical compared. Why is that? Is it because the coffee is so much better? No, it's just because their fiat currency is so much worse and so much worth less than what it was about a decade or so ago. Due to the nature of inflation, the value of money decreases with time. It's easy to assume that making $30,000 a year should allow you to live the same lifestyle that your parents did on the same income, but it's not possible. $30,000 is worth significantly less now. The current monetary equivalent to $30,000 40 years ago is about 160 grand today, ladies and gentlemen. Think about that. Where has all of that wealth gone? Okay, because wealth cannot be destroyed. Okay, it can only be transferred from one to another. So being that your money today is worth so much less, who has all of that wealth that was stripped from your money? Well, take a look at all of the corporations that the government gives handouts to. Take a look at all of the wealth that the government has stripped from your purchasing power in order so that it can create money out of thin air and spend on whatever it wants to, as it forsakes its own people here in the U.S. And here they're saying that people are feeling the pain of inflation, and that's what we've been talking about for a while. I hope you that are listening to this and maybe have been part of this community for a while got prepared for inflation. My parents keep telling me I just need to work harder, says one TikTok user. We know this. Our parents don't get it, wrote another. Another chimed in and said, I'm so tired of my dad saying, I don't know why you're struggling. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason is the money. The money is no good. The Federal Reserve note has lost 90+% of its value just since 1971. The thing is that we are not, as a nation, as a people, we are not asking the right question. What is that question? Why? Why has it lost 90+% of its value in the last 50 years? If more people knew this, we would regain our power because we would insist that the government have a currency and not a fiat currency. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is what I say about that. It would be a very painful transition for us to be able to limit our government to what it spends by having a currency that is backed by an asset. It doesn't necessarily have to be gold or silver. Those are just the things that work the best. I know the Bitcoin maximalists out there are going to say Bitcoin as well. Maybe there's a part of that, part for Bitcoin in our currency later on in the future, but I just don't believe right now that there is. I think it should be freely traded, without all of these regulations that are put on it and stuff like that. But I digress. The government does not want to be restricted. That is why inflation has taken off. In the last 3 or 4 years, the government has printed about 40% of all of the dollars that have ever existed in the history of this nation, going back 200 and almost 50 years. Do you think that has something to do with how much the things at the grocery stores cost? And finishing it off here, they say that as the value of money decreases, the income needed to live a lifestyle equal to what your parents had 40 years ago will continue to rise, and a comfortable life on an average salary will become more and more unattainable.
If your parents made $30,000 a year 40 years ago in 1983, you'd have to make $162,342 in 2023 just to have the same purchasing power adjusted for inflation. Think of it this way. Right now, I'm sitting at this desk, and there's $10,000 in cash. Physically, we're looking at it. I jump in a spaceship. I come back 4 years later, 5 years later. It'll look like 10,000, but feel like 7,000. What inflation erodes at the buying power of each and every dollar. So you have to understand that money is worth less, not worthless, but worth less than the year before.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, do you find that it's a coincidence that in 1983, 1 ounce of gold was $382, and today it's about $2,050? And that equals about 5.3. If we round it up, because it's 5.3.6, it would be 5.4 times more than it was worth in 1983. Do you find it a coincidence that if you take $162,000 and you divide that $162,000 by the $30,000 that they started with in 1983, that it comes out to 5.4? Pretty much the exact same amount that gold has gone up in that same time frame. Do you think that's a coincidence? Or do you think that maybe there are powers at play that have been stripping you of your wealth, your mom and dad's wealth, etc., 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 for the last several decades, and that they are not going to stop unless we wisen up and teach our children what real money is and how to protect it? I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much if you've made it through this entire video. I hope you did, because I feel that it was very important to talk about this, and I hope that you talk about it with your children, your friends, and your family as well. God bless every one of you. God bless America. I'm Alaska Prepper. I'm out.